Department says 81 undocumented foreign nationals were arrested between the 17th and 20th of last month during sting operations across the country. That's following an arrest. A fine of 2,000 rand is issued per person, and the process of deporting the undocumented individuals kicks in. Speaking at a media briefing in Pretoria, the Minister of Employment and Labour, Nomakosazana Meth, urged employers to abide by the country's laws.
In the week between 17th and 20th of September, we had the high-impact Blitz inspections and enforcement across the country. And the total number of companies visited is at excess of 2,900. And 46% of those were found to be non-compliant. So arrests were made, besides just the ones that you are talking about. They were made across the country. About 81 arrests were made, in particular of the foreign nationals and also of the employers that were referred because they were found to be non-compliant.
Joined by Viwe Mlenzana, who's the Acting Director General of the Employment and Labour Department. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. We just listened there to the Minister speaking about 81 undocumented foreign nationals arrested across the country during such raids last month. What does this now indicate insofar as the level of business compliance is concerned with such numbers?
Well, good evening and thank you for welcoming me to your program. I think, as the minister indicated, the level of non-compliance in our country with labor laws is a bit challenging and is a bit concerning. Yes, indeed, for purposes of this past month, we've been focusing on the hospitality sector. And the reason why we've been focusing on that is because we have picked up that there are, concerning signs and indications that perhaps that particular sector has had to, has got some tendencies that are untoward.
The tendencies that are untoward, what do you think would be, some of the motives behind that? I mean, where are the loopholes as we scrutinize those tendencies?
Well, I think firstly, we careful that we do not necessarily settle, everybody with the same, with the same settle, as it were, because there are employers that are trying to do their best. But however, 49% of the employers that we visited are rather, not compliant. So it would appear that it's either they are ignoring the laws deliberately, because it can be argued that people are not aware of what the laws are. Clearly, what ought to happen then, obviously, is that we've got to obviously try and tighten up on the legislation to make sure that there is much more significant consequences, as it were.
Do you think it's about tightening up legislation, or is it more a matter of implementation of the current legislation? Because if you'll have to look at small business, which is operating in the sector, one would argue as a small business that the red tape is so much that complying requires a lot of money to comply in terms of certification and operations. So as you talk about tightening up legislation, is it looking and weighing up how best to implement legislation, or do you think that it's more to tighten it up?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. I mean, There's no doubt that perhaps, for small businesses here and there could be an argument that, as they have argued with us, that they do find some of the labor laws to be a bit onerous, and perhaps, they might have to be, revisited here and there. But we think that a majority of the cases that we have seen are actually aware of what the legislation is, and they seek or tend to not to apply or comply with the legislation. So, which then means, therefore, that perhaps there is a requirement to look at much more, sort of enforcement activities.
The ripple effect of the Blitz inspections have seen workers speaking out. I mean, some of the horror stories telling how they survive on tips from long shifts without earning a basic salary. Is this among the most shocking revelations you've uncovered during your inspections, or is there more?
Well, look, I mean, so one of the worst for me that we have seen is a 14-year-old child who was employed in the Limpopo province. And certainly that is, unacceptable in our country. We've got very stringent laws that regulate, the level of age that employers could or children are allowed to work in our country. So such levels are not necessarily comforting to see. But I think also there are areas where employers do agree to minimum wages through the bargaining council or wage agreements, but then do not comply with the same that they have agreed to. So that then, defeats me in terms of why would they then, agree voluntarily on these particular wages, but then not comply with them. So clearly there is something wrong somewhere.
As the department conducts the Blitz inspections at eateries to check for compliance, critics have argued that it's all very well to see some results and conduct these random inspections, but what about consistency? Is there capacity for consistency? Do you have enough inspectors? Because there's a lot more that still needs to be uncovered.
Well, look, I mean, without a doubt that we do not necessarily have enough inspectors out there. And it is for that reason that we are looking at capacitating the inspectorate. We are wanting to look at risk profiling and be sharper in our risk profiling so that we can then also be segmented in our approach. We also do want to make it easier for employers that to comply by making sure when we visit them that we don't necessarily visit them for this week and next week and the following week, but we are there to look at all of the labor legislations, and we then can make sure that we are in for a certain period and then we're out and we can leave them alone to focus on the business. So yes, we are wanting to look at specific skills that we want to deploy specifically in certain sectors that we identify as risk, and we would have specialists focusing on those. So yes, we want to address quite comprehensively the capacity of our enforcement.
Is there a budget that has been allocated for this plan?
Well, look, I mean, we are working on those modalities. I don't think we are ready yet to announce on those and pronounce on those particular details.
And very lastly, Acting DG, before we let you go, what are the repercussions for businesses who have failed to comply? I mean, we've seen the arrests taking place, but what does facing the full might of the law mean? Does it mean that businesses are shut down? Does it mean that there are fines so steep that businesses could shut down? What are you actually trying to say when you speak about enacting the full might of the law?
So there are a number of different ways. So firstly, let's start with those that do not comply with basic conditions of employment. And what would happen is that if ever people, for instance, they're not necessarily, sticking to the national minimum wage or the basic conditions of employment, as it were, they will then be expected to comply within 14 days. Failing which, then they will then be fined if ever they don't comply. Then if you move along to the occupational health and safety laws, if they don't comply with safety laws, they'll be given a period of 60 days to comply, failing which then they face a prosecution.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Let's leave it there as we sum up that conversation with Viwe Mlenzana, who's the Acting Director General of the Employment and Labour Department.